نريد جوابه ممن وعاه إذا مات الإله بصنع قوم أماتوه فما هذا الإله وهل أرضاه ما نالوه منه فبشراهم إذا نالوا رضاه وإن سخط الذي فعلوه فيه فقوتهم إذا أوهت قواه وهل بقي الوجود بلا إله سميع يستجيب لمن دعاه وهل خلت الطباق السبع لما ثوى تحت التراب وقد علاه وهل خلت العوالم من إله يدبرها وقد سمرت يداه وكيف تخلت الأملاك عنه بنصرهم وقد سمعوا بكاه وكيف أطاقت الخشبات حمل الإله الحق مشدودا قفاه وكيف دنا الحديد إليه حتى يخالطه ويلحقه أذاه وكيف تمكنت أيدي عداه.
Sir, please let me talk, okay? Is Jesus God? Well, yes, the answer is yes. You do believe that. Did God reveal at least parts of the Old Testament? Well, of course you believe that. Now, Robert wanted to make a distinction. He brought up an example about Paul trying to remember how many people he baptized. But in the Old Testament, when it says that God is speaking and that God commanded X, was that just somebody making it up or misremembering? No, the Bible says it's God. So listen to this passage. 1 Samuel 15, 1-3. And Samuel said to Saul, the Lord sent me to anoint you king over his people Israel. Not, oh, I'm just talking at it, my backside. Now, therefore, listen to the words of the Lord. Who are they? They're the words of the Lord. They're not the words of Samuel or your neighbor John or whoever else. Thus says the Lord of hosts, I have noted what Amalek did to Israel in opposing them on the way when they came out of Egypt. Now go and strike Amalek and devote to destruction all that they have. Do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, child and infant, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. So do not tell me, sir, that God, Jesus, did not order the killing of innocent people. He not only did he do that, he ordered the killing of babies, none of which you will ever find anywhere in the Quran or Sunnah. So if you have a problem, let me finish, sir.
You don't have it in Sunnah?
Let me finish, sir. If you have a problem with God ordering death for apostasy and all these other things that you're bringing up, Robert, when you bring up the issue of Paul, well, he's trying to remember how many people he baptized. Is that analogous to this text where a prophet Samuel is explicitly saying that these are the words of the Lord? Was Samuel lying? Did God actually say this? And if so, is killing babies inherently immoral when at war?
Yeah, killing babies is bad, Jake. Yes.
Is it inherently immoral?
Yeah.
So why did your God order
Why did Jesus order it?
Why did your God Jesus
the problem you have,
why did your God
the problem
Jesus
you have
command
once again,
the killing of infants?
If you'll let me answer, the problem that you have once again is that you're reading the Bible as if it were the Quran. And see, these things actually trouble Jews and Christians. There's no reason to cover up that fact that these passages have caused difficulty for Jews and Christians throughout history. And some people would say, actually, these things never happened at all. That they were fables designed to teach.
Do you believe
that they were fables designed to teach that you are to be completely pure and reject sin, and that all that business about killing this one and that one is about rejecting various sins?
Want to know your
now, the whole point of what I'm saying here, if you would stop interrupting for a minute, I did not interrupt you. The whole point of what I'm saying here is that these passages precisely in the fact that they have caused trouble for Jews and Christians and have led to differing interpretations of them, demonstrate that the Jews and Christians both have an evolving understanding that comes from later revelations and that comes from their own interpretation of the revelations that they received, such that they can say unequivocally that, yes, killing innocent people is wrong. Whereas you have Muhammad, and they ask him, you're throwing rocks, you're catapulting stones into the infidels' city, they got women and children in there, and he says, oh, they're among them. In other words, it doesn't really matter if you kill women and children because they're all infidels. And you don't have any kind of critical stepping back and saying, maybe that is not to be. That's the one I'm talking about.
Can you read this to him? He
Yeah.
said there's no
Permissibility.
Nowhere in Sunnah. Just read it, please.
This is Sahih Muslim, which is one of the hadiths. Permissibility of killing women and children in night raids.
Can you start from the beginning? Start from the beginning. Go for
Read the actual text.
Will you stop interrupting me? I did not interrupt you. Permissibility of killing women and children in night raids, so long as it is not done deliberately. It is reported on the authority of Sa'b ibn Jathama that the Prophet of Allah, when asked about the women and children of the polytheists being killed during the night raid, said, they are from them. And this is Sahih Muslim 1745a. And that, once I make the point, that is giving permission. And that's actually was invoked by Zarqawi, the Al-Qaeda leader in Iraq, when he was explaining why women and children were killed by the jihad bombings, and he was actually justifying it among Muslims. And he invoked that passage.
Okay, so the difference is if you actually read the next hadith afterwards, it clarifies it, sir. And yes, if you're talking about bombardment or collateral damage in which an infant or child or a woman may be harmed inadvertently and unintentionally, then yes, that can happen. It's not a good thing that we enjoy in war, but if it happens, so be it. The difference is that in this text, it's specifically commanding from God. And what you said before, well, some Christians say, well, it's not actually historical. Maybe it didn't happen. Well, I don't care about other Christians, with all due respect. For this conversation, we're talking to the two of you and the two Muslims, and we are representing our positions. So we want to know from you, do you believe that 1 Samuel 15, 1-3 was revealed by God and that God himself ordered directly, intentionally for the killing of babies and infants?
Let me answer that. You are judging a war that happened 3,000 years ago.
Is it
by
historical?
this? Just wait. You are judging a war that happened 3,000 years ago by the standards of today. The difference between the Old Testament and Islam, we believe those applied for those circumstances and stayed there. These should not be applied today. Islam, jihad should be applied in the time of Muhammad, today and forever. So killing the kids of polytheists, Muhammad answered, they are from them. They are just polytheists like them. So it's okay to kill them. And let me tell you about killing kids, how you define a kid. In the raid of Bani Qurayda, a Jewish tribe, Muhammad came and he said, check the hair of puberty for every kid. If you find one hair, you can kill him because he's considered an adolescent. So they killed 600 people on that day. You want to tell me that doesn't exist in Islam? I know it exists in Islam. And I know if you got authority today, you will do it.
Here's what I want to do. I want to have Daniel give a response, and then I'm going to go to the next topic. Go for it, Daniel.
Okay, so Banu Qurayza, that was a tribe that betrayed the Muslims in war. So that was an act of treason. Every legal system in history, every religion, when you do an act of treason in war, what's the punishment for that? Capital punishment. And that was what was applied. The punishment fit the crime. The point that Jake made is that the Prophet, peace be upon him, explicitly forbade the intentional killing of women and children in the hadith that you didn't mention. So this is dishonest. Exactly. You read one hadith from the book of jihad in Sahih Muslim, but you don't read the other hadith. Exactly. So that is dishonest on your part, sir. And then let's bring it back, to the overall picture, because for your viewers, many of them might not be Muslim or Christian. They think like, both of you guys are crazy. Both of you, your religion sound ridiculous. So I want to defend not only traditional Islam, but also traditional Christianity. You know, I want to defend, I think that's what building bridges is really about. Defending traditional religion, where every religion has conquest, it has violence, it has rules of war. And guess what? We live in a world of realpolitik. Every nation is engaging in war of conquest, expanding its influence and using violence as a means. The US is the biggest perpetrator of that. The Russia now is doing that in Ukraine, endorsed by the Orthodox Church, by the way. You have China, who is also expanding its influence. So every society, every culture, every traditional religion says, yes, use means and violence if necessary to expand your influence and to conquer and to conquest and to impose what? Your values. That is something universal. As Muslims, we're proud of that. As Muslims, we're proud of that. We're proud of our religion, and we're not going to reform it and modify it. It's only modern Christians, actually, and these other religions that are reforming their traditional beliefs in deference to what? In deference to this hegemony that I'm talking about, the liberal secular powers, and saying, no, our religion is just about peace. Our religion is just about like no violence, no nothing. Okay, you have to throw all your traditional texts under the bus. Muslims are not willing to do that.
And that argument has been made clearly, and the audience has to decide which to them seems more of a faith, which leads me to the next question. A faith where you would want to raise your family in a country based on those values. So in America, when you look at the statistics, you'll see 20,000 Christians have converted to Muslim, right? Of which 75% are women. With the number we'll see 3/4 are women and 1/4 are men. Okay. The question I would have is, I lived in Iran for 10 years. I don't know if you guys have lived in a Muslim nation before. You lived, obviously, you lived in Morocco. Have you lived in a Muslim?
No.
You're here. So I lived in Iran 10 years as a Christian family, and we would go to church, and I went to Christian school, and then we escaped and went to Germany, lived at a refugee camp with a lot of different sects from different parts of the world who were escaping. They were either escaping communism or they were escaping not feeling safe, persecution for their religion, what they believed in. They didn't have the freedom, they left. Why is it? This is a question that's been brought up when I'm crowdsourcing what questions you want us to ask the guests that are here today. If it's purely statistical, why are more Muslims moving to Christian nations and not Christian nations moving to Muslim nations? Why do you think that is?
It's economics, pure economics. If you look at Christians that move to Saudi and the Gulf, there's a huge influx of Christians from the Philippines, from Africa, from Eastern Europe, that flock to the Gulf countries, Muslim countries. Why? Because of GDP, because of the economy. The influx of people of all religions and cultures to the US, to Australia, to Europe, it's purely because of economic opportunity, not because of there's some kind of better way of life. The way of life in the US, and I can talk to you because you lived 10 years in Iran, the culture of traditional societies, especially Muslim societies, is much more conducive to family. It's more of a family, community-based life as opposed to an individualistic, rat race, everyone is out for himself type of lifestyle that you live in the West. And that's because of the hegemony that we're talking about, because of liberal secularism, because of this pursuit of happiness at the expense of all else. When you have a religion that values family, marriage, look at the divorce rates. Look at how, I have 5 sons of my own. I'm very worried about, will they even be able to find a wife who will be faithful to them and who will want to have children, my grandchildren, who will be faithful. Look at the divorce rates. Look at the infidelity rates. Look at all of the social problems that are infecting Western societies. Why is that? I'd argue it's on the basis of leaving traditional Christianity, leaving traditional Islam, reforming these religions. That's the problem. Look at someone like Reza Aslan. You interviewed him,
I had him
right?
on, yeah.
And you had a brilliant comment. You said that, Reza, when you're talking, I feel like you're an atheist. You're arguing, I don't think that you're actually a Muslim. Like, you're not talking like you're a Muslim. You're talking like this progressive, liberal, atheist type person. And that's what's happening to everyone. because of these political forces. And we have to resist that. We have to resist those kinds of influences in order to preserve marriage, preserve family, preserve community. That exists in the Muslim world, but it's being eroded.
So why are you still here? Why are you in America? Why don't you go to a Muslim nation?
I would like to do that. But the thing is that the West has declared war on every traditional society. If you don't implement Western style liberal human rights, quote unquote, like you don't legalize homosexuality, you don't legalize transgender, you don't legalize feminism, all these things that are destroying marriage and family, we're going to bomb you. We're going to sanction you. We're going to starve your people. It's not safe for Muslims to be in Muslim countries. It's not safe for traditional Christians. Traditional Christians quoting the Bible within Europe are being put in prison for quoting the Bible. They'll literally quote a verse from Leviticus, or they'll talk about Sodom and Gomorrah. They're put in prison. This is a war on all traditional religions. And there's not a safe place for a traditional religious person in the world today because of this dominant global power.
So your argument is economy, capitalism, a capitalistic society. So then the question would be, why don't Muslim regions accept the principles of a capitalistic free society to be able to attract other Christians? Because when you hear some stories, but I got that. Brother Rashid, do you have a response to him on this question, specifically the question I'm asking? Why do Christian nations attract Muslims, but Muslim nations not attract Christians?
He said the economy is the first reason,
yes.
but other reasons exist too. I have seen so many Saudi girls leaving Saudi Arabia, going to Canada and the US and the UK, asking for asylum because they don't have the same rights, and they are forced to stay as a second-class status. Women is not treated well in Muslim countries. I have seen people who are leaving Morocco and other places because they don't have freedom of speech. And if you say anything against Islam in Egypt or Morocco, or for me, for example, why I left Morocco. I love Morocco. I would love to live among my family, but I left not because of the economy. I was doing well, but because I don't have freedom of religion. And there are many countries that are like that. If you open the borders in Europe and the US, you have almost probably, I can't guess, but like probably 90% of Muslims will go to the West, not just because of money. It's because of other reasons. They are oppressed there. And our brothers, they have their solution to what will live is not what I am here. Of course, we have a problem in the West, but the solution they are given is worse than what we have today. For example, LGBTQ, whatever, they will kill them if we bring, let's say, let them govern with Islam today. They will throw them from a higher building. That's their punishment. I'm not with that. I'm not either this, the two extremes, either this or that. Islam is not going to give a solution. Why we have human rights in the West? Why everything we are enjoying today, it came from the West? For example, women's rights came from the West. Abolishing slavery came from the West. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion came from the West. You name it. Just give me anything. Democracies came from the West. So they want us to live under an authoritarian system, and you cannot even question it. And if you say anything against it, you will be condemned to death. For example, if I say Islam is not the right way to God, I cannot say that in a Muslim country. I will be punished for that. So we are enjoying freedom of speech, freedom of religion, democracy. We can say our opinion. We can have a podcast like that without a problem. Guess what? In Morocco, when I became a Christian, we met as Christians in closed doors. We couldn't sing. We couldn't baptize people. We couldn't name our kids Christian names. You cannot name him Luke or Mark or anything. You have to name him Muhammad and Omar and Abu Bakr. You can't name them Christian names.
This is not true.
It's true. I lived it.
It's not. In Islamic law. Okay, do you know Ahkam Ahl al-Dhimma? Do you know the principle?
I'm not Ahl al-Dhimma. I'm an apostate.
Yeah, you don't talk about other Christians. Christians can name their children. Okay, you lived in a Muslim country.
Okay, let me finish.
Named Patrick, or was that against the law?
Let me finish. I am a convert from Islam to Christianity, and I had hundreds like me. Girls and boys, we were gathering, we were afraid of police, and we got arrested many times. We got interrogated.
So let me get this straight. So I want to understand what both of you are saying. So for us, I was born in a Muslim country. My name is Patrick. My sister's name is Paulette. You're saying if a Muslim converts to Christian, you can't just name your kids anything. You have to name them those specific names.
Yes.
And you're okay with that? You think that's normal?
I said something even, more than that. I said that the punishment is death penalty. So forget it. That's what we talked about
at the beginning. Right? Apostles totally get it. So for you, it's not even your level for that is for somebody to go. But why is that?
But that's not the treatment of all Christians.
So I totally get that. But
Jews.
Why do you believe that? Why do you believe if a Muslim becomes a Christian is the death penalty? Why do you believe
this is what I wanted to explain is that first of all, this is found in every religion. It's found in every culture. The idea that you have to have punishments for defection, meaning that if you abandon the group, you are threatening the group. And that's why every business, every university, every society has community guidelines, for example.
Yeah.
If you violate the community guidelines, it's not called blasphemy, it's called a violation of community guidelines. You're expelled from that community, you face consequences. But it goes beyond that because you have restrictions on your speech, right? We can't look at this YouTube channel. I can't say certain things on this live stream. Otherwise, the video will be banned. Your channel will get in trouble. And then you can be prosecuted. You can face all kinds of consequences. Again, go back to your Glenn Greenwald interview, your interview with Whitney Webb. Look at the power structures that restrict speech. They restrict thought. Why? In order to preserve the power structure. Every religion has this. Traditional Christianity. That's why heretics were punished. That's why apostates were punished in Buddhism.
Let me ask a follow up on that.
Sure,
so when you say to me, I've interviewed almost any of the major living mobsters. I've had them on the podcast before. I don't know if that's your stuff that you would watch, but I've interviewed a lot of them. Sammy the Bull, Michael Francis, a lot of these guys. Okay, so I can see you with your last name. Yes. Yeah. So when I interview these guys, one of the things that they have, and Sammy is a very much of he says, look, I'm a mafioso. I'm a true mafioso is what I am. Till today, he's in his late 70s. He still says that, right? If you step away from the life, like you could get killed if you step away from the life, right? Okay, you chose this life. You celebrated when you become a made man. Now you want to leave? You got the benefits of being a made man. Now you want to leave? We're going to take your life if based on the principles that they followed. But that's the mafia. For somebody that may say, well, then Islam is Islam following some of the mafia philosophies that if you choose to leave, you deserve to lose your life? Don't you think that's a bit extreme?
I would say the problem with the mafia is criminal activity. It's not with this principle. This is a good principle. That's why they're able to be so organized. That's why they're able to be so successful.
That's the argument.
And you have nations that are run in the same way. You have to preserve the nation by punishing defection because it threatens the unity of the group. It threatens the way of life.
That's tough, though, man.
But that's the law. That's what exists.
I totally understand that. All I'm saying is that's tough because, okay, so let me get to more the business side, the next side.
Let me just add a little bit to it.
Go for it.
I will be killed, my kids will be taken, and my wife will be taken. Just to add to the list in an Islamic system.
Let me continue with this. Let me continue with this a little bit because this is getting interesting to me. So if in insurance, there's two ways to build, or real estate, there's two ways guys build their real estate and their insurance companies. Let me explain this, and you'll see where I'm going with this question. One is there's guys that steal from other people. Okay. And I'll say, oh, you train those guys, I'll take your agents. You train those guys, I'll take your agents. You're getting 60%, I'll give you 80% if you come to my company. So their entire business model is to take from others, right? And then they're always capped because somebody else is not going to come and say, he gave you 80, I'll give you 100. And then so now they go to a different guy. And then the other guy will say, he gave you 100, I'll give you 110. Then they'll realize there's only 130. So how much more is left to do? I'll give you 115 if you come to me 5 more. Okay, I'll come to you. And then eventually, you're stuck. You're not going to go anywhere, right? Okay. So these agencies are not baptism agencies. They're converting agencies. I'll convert you to me by me giving you a better life or better heaven or better, dream that I'm selling to you, right? For me, the way I see it is and then the other side is guys that recruit people from other industries and they make them realtors. So I'm working at Sears. You should consider getting a real estate license. I convert you. You're a nurse. You should think about being a realtor. I become a realtor. So you understand the two examples I'm giving. I'm recruiting other realtors. I'm converting somebody into being a realtor. Hence religion, Muslim. I'm targeting Christians to convert them. No, I'm converting people that are, becoming Muslims, or just we're having more kids, and that's how we're going to grow a religion. Okay. So the criticism and fear that a lot of Christians will say, non-Muslims will say, is, if we go the way we do right now, one day Muslims are going to run the world. Do you not fear that? And you'll hear that. Okay. And by the way, it's a fair argument, because right now the number is, give or take, the Muslim population worldwide, I think, is around 1.7 billion. And it's expected by 2060 to grow by 74% to 3.1 billion. Today, they're 24.1% of the world population. By 2060, you'll be 31.1%. These are some real numbers that they're increasing. And Christians will say, well, are you not worried about that? Are you not worried about that? Are you not worried about that? Okay. So then my argument becomes, because I'm a data guy, Muslim women have 2.9 kids per woman. Christians are around 2.5, 2.6. Non-Muslims are 2.2. And the replacement game, you need to have 2.1.
Yeah. So
2.1 is a replacement game. 2.2 is non-Muslims. Christians are 2.6, and then you have Muslims eating away 2.9. By the way, in the 90s, you were at 4.3, 4.5. In 1990, 1995, 30 years ago, you were at 4.5, 4.3. So where am I going with this? So where I'm going with this is, if this goes the way it does, and they do what they do, it is very natural that the Senate, that Congress, that House, that governors are going to be ran by Muslims. Right now, you have 3 that are there. You mentioned the names earlier. There used to be 1 in the past. That's 4. But we had 82 in the midterm election who are Muslims that got elected to city, state, different kind of jobs that they had record-breaking ever, right? So if I don't look at it from the faith standpoint, if I don't look at it from the religion standpoint, if I don't look at it from the argument of who's right, who's wrong, Muhammad, Jesus, if I don't look at it from there, I would simply say their strategy of growing is kicking Christians' tail. So then Christians can either sit there and complain about it, or they can do something about it. But Christians don't want to have that many kids. Christians are not having 4, 5, 6 kids. He has 5. You said you have 5 sons? 5 sons? Okay, he's got 5 sons. I don't know how many of you have 5 sons at this table. I got 2 and 2 girls. 5 sons is going to be the rest of us, right? If he's going to keep having these kids. So what is your solution as a Christian? And I'm purely talking business right now. The business of religion is what I'm talking right now. According to the business of religion, they're going to win. And there's nothing Christians can do about it. By the business, you can sit and argue the faith all you want. They're getting their people and their kids baptized, because their job isn't recruiting Christians to become Muslims. They've only converted 20,000. That's not a lot. It's not a big number. But they're getting more kids, and they're raising their kids with the loyalty to the parents, and they're following that faith, and they're growing bigger, and we're not doing that. What are your thoughts to that?
Well, if you're asking me what the solution is, obviously Christians have to recover a sense of their faith and a sense of what's at stake, because what you're talking about will happen if this continues is that the United States will look like Egypt or Saudi Arabia or Iran. Those were not always the heart of the Islamic world. Those were conquered and Islamized. And the Christians were, like Rashid was saying, were made second class, made subject to all kinds of humiliating and discriminatory regulations, and had to pay a special tax that's specified in the Quran, chapter 9, verse 29. And they ultimately, most of them in those areas, and in North Africa, other areas like that, many of them thought, why am I suffering this and having to live in this way? All I have to do is convert to Islam and I can live a decent life. And most of them did. And so you have areas that were 99% Christian, and now they're 99% Muslim. And so people don't realize, they think, they look at Egypt and they say, well, that's the Islamic world. They don't realize that these things are always in flux, and that exactly what happened there is beginning to happen in the West. And so I think that if Christians were to come to realize what's at stake, which would be extraordinarily difficult given the amount of propaganda and falsehood that's spread about these issues in the mainstream, then they might begin to realiase that they need to take.
What's the solution, though? What's the next steps? What is the solution from your standpoint?
They have to have larger families, certainly, and have to meet the dawah, the proselytizing initiatives, and be able to answer all the objections to show the inhumane aspects
But
of
Christians
Islam.
are not that united. These guys are
Right,
united.
exactly.
So Christians are competing against each other. Muslims are more united.
Yeah.
Oh
they're not
no, I disagree to
Okay.
that. We have Shia, we have Sunni. They are fighting each other,
I
they're
agree.
killing each
Fair
other.
enough. Yes.
And so they are not really united. And if you go to Salafis, they will make the Sufis are as mushriks.
But would you
polytheists.
agree that Sunnis and Shias are united at least in the values?
No,
Not
no.
necessarily because the cousin or that's the history part where who got the passed down. I'm talking purely values and philosophies.
You know what? Muslims will claim we are 1.7, and when you ask them details, they will be Ahmadis are not Muslims, Shia are not Muslims, and you will find just the guy in his mosque at the end instead of 1.7. I lived that. When you really scrutinize them, you will find just the guy in his mosque. They are the ones. Actually, Muhammad said his people will divide to 73 groups. And one of them only go to heaven. So 72 of them, they're just like kuffar. They are not really Muslims. So let's go back to that. Replacement rate, for example, in some countries like Iran is below 2.1.
Mm-hmm.
In Turkey, it's below 2.1. In others, they are below that. So there is a huge drop. For example, in Morocco, I think it was like 6.9, and now it's like 2.8 or 2.7. So next generation will be below replacement rate. So they will suffer also from.
You believe that? So you believe their numbers is going to go below the Christian replacement?
I will believe they will drop because we have so many challenges, economy, so many other things. And another thing, they don't count how many people are leaving Islam. We don't have statistics. I have statistics, for example, people who write to me, according just to my show, from Morocco, from Algeria, from Iran, for example. So many people are leaving to atheism, to Christianity, to other worldviews. In Egypt, in Saudi Arabia, so they don't count that. I still count it as a Muslim in the 1.7.
Yep.
And many people like me. So if they give freedom and we do real surveys, we will have the number less. Another thing, what Islam is left? The West forced Muslims to abolish slavery, to not practice the real Islam, like amputing hands and feet and crucifying. They are now forcing them to have one wife. So Islam, the version of Islam in the Muslim world is not really what they are preaching. So what Muslims do we have? According to their standards, probably most of them are kafir.
And not only that, it's because of the death penalty for apostasy that this is unreported. But also there was a survey, and people did answer the anonymous survey recently in Iran. Only 40% of the population identified as Muslim. Now that's extraordinary, and it shows how inhumane Sharia Islamic law
Who
is.
ran that poll? Who?
I don't remember who ran it, but it's easy to find. We can look it up
Rob,
here.
can you look it up?
1979 to now,
Got it,
we've
right
had Islamic law in Iran, and now 60% of Iranians have rejected Islam. That's because they've lived it since 1979, and they realize how much they don't like it.
Yeah, I just want to comment because they're talking a lot about the supposed disunity amongst Muslims, as if you don't have that in Christianity, right?
Oh, yeah, you do.
You do, right? So, Rashid, I know that Robert here is Eastern Orthodox. He used to be Catholic. What denomination or sect of Christianity do you belong to?
Because we are converts in Morocco, we don't follow anything. We just follow.
I'm saying,
the
like,
gospel.
do you go to a specific church?
I went to many Orthodox, Protestant. I don't care.
Okay, so anyway, my point is, you have the three main sects in Christianity: the Protestants, the Catholics, the Eastern Orthodox. Historically, they fought with each other over very, what from the outside people would think, well, why are they fighting over this? I mean, today the Orthodox and Catholics are fighting over doctrines like the Filioque, whether or not the Holy Spirit proceeds forth from the Father and the Son, or the Father alone eternally, and they're completely divided on this, and call each other heretics and all kinds of stuff. So to act as if, right, there's this division among Sunnis and Shia, when, as I think Patrick rightly pointed out, we have much more in common in terms of our actual values. We differ in terms of certain historical doctrines, but that's another story. On the other hand, you have so many different sects within Christianity, so many different denominations, all of them disagree and consider each other to be heretics. So for you to make that accusation and critique of Islam, I just don't think is correct. It opens up.
Look at the history of the Catholics versus Protestants in Europe. Over 5 million killed in the wake of the Protestant Reformation. So, I mean, that's a That applies to Christianity more than Islam. But going back to Patrick's point is that you want to grow your numbers and grow the Christian population. I want to help Christians grow, because I think a world that has more Christians is better than a world that has more atheists. But how can you have more Christians when you don't really believe in the Bible? We have the seeds of the destruction of Christianity right in this podcast, because when you look at the way that Robert and Rashid describe the Bible, they describe it as a book of fables, and it can continue to evolve.
I didn't say that.
This is going to cause apostasy. This is going to cause a decrease in faith. Like, why should I take Christianity seriously when it just evolves and it changes over time? I can't connect my practices and my beliefs as a Christian today with the historical Jesus. So why am I going to maintain myself as a Christian? And then also the whole theology, which we haven't discussed at all today, like
the 95%.
Monotheism is 80 to 90% of the world believes in monotheism, in one God. And monotheism is a central, crucial, the most important part of Islam, the belief in one God without partners. He is not like anything. This is a very powerful belief that 80 to 90% of human beings profess in this day and age. And Islam represents that in its theology and emphasizes that in its theology. But if you have a Trinity, or you have a theology that is not really clear, is Jesus God? Is there a Godhead? Is there this other system? Do we go by the Catholics, or do we go by the Orthodox? Do we go by the Protestants? You don't have a consistent theology. Sunnis and Shias, they all agree on monotheism. God is one. He is not like anything. They agree on the Quran. Yeah, there can be some theological differences and nuances between different schools, but there's not the same kind of disparity or variance between Christian sects and this idea of the Trinity, which frankly no one can understand. Like, what does it mean to be 3 in 1?
Let me respond to that. Let me respond to that. My brother is mentioning divisions between Catholics and Protestants. If I go back, there are divisions among the follower, the disciples of Muhammad, the Sahaba themselves. They killed each other. You know that the wife of Muhammad went and killed the followers of Ali in Mawqi'at al-Jamal. Thousands died among the first disciples. This didn't happen between Peter and John, by the way. And so if you go to Islam, from the beginning, they fought each other, and they had divisions from the beginning. You know that, for example, the fight over the Quran was created or eternal. They fought over that. And actually, one time they had the whole caliphate going one way, the other time they killed people who believed that. So you're trying just to give a fake picture. There are divisions, there are killings among Muslims all through history, from the beginning, from the start, which didn't happen within Christianity, by the way.
Peter and James.
They didn't kill each other. They didn't kill each other
because they didn't have political authority.
Okay. Oh, wow.
Were they fighting each other?
Who killed Ottoman, for example? Who killed
Paul and Peter and James? Were they at war? Were they fighting? They
were not fighting. Okay.
They weren't.
Fight is to take an army against another one. Aisha took an army and killed people.
If you don't have an army, you don't have political power.
You
completely destroys the point.
You lost your argument. You're trying to make a false analogy here. You lost your argument. This is not an analogy.
You're not gonna win over any Christians by constructing these straw man arguments that completely misrepresent.
I would say this, but if I may, and I want to hear your thoughts. Just a quick rebuttal here. My point earlier is I don't think they're trying to convert. Because I think, hear me out.
Oh, sure they are.
I'm sure they are. But I don't think that's where they rely on. The earlier point I made, their strategy on outgrowing Christians is to internally raise kids from the beginning rather than converting.
Oh, yeah.
That's the way they're going to be, able to do what they want to do. So if you want to respond, go right ahead.
Well, they are obviously converting Christians because Jake is here. But the fact is
20,000.
Islam is not really that attractive a message. And so there aren't many people who are converts. Most of the people, like you're saying, the reason why it's growing is because of polygamy and because the women have many, many more children than women in the West do. But in any case, the points that I was making, you're completely misrepresenting and running with your misunderstanding and claiming I said things I never said. The point that I was making was that the Old Testament and the New Testament, as I said before, are records of an evolving understanding among the people of God. And that because of that evolving understanding, they came to realize that these things had no applicability for all people for all time. The idea that the Old Testament is not applicable for Christians is in the New Testament itself. That's actually a large preoccupation of the New Testament, that they are free, the Christians are free from the law. And so you bring up these Old Testament examples, the big difficulty you have is that nobody in the Christian world is thinking this is marching orders for today, whereas people read the Quran, unfortunately, they do think that when it says kill them wherever you find them, when you meet the unbelievers, strike the necks, and so on, they do believe that these things are marching orders for today because the Quran does not have these different stages of development. But this doesn't mean in Christianity that just anything goes. In Catholicism and Orthodoxy, you have the apostolic succession and the authority of the bishops who can authoritatively interpret the scriptures and set the doctrines. And those doctrines have been consistent from the beginning. It's not as if it's some free-for-all.
Patrick,
excuse me, you're interrupting once again, and I never interrupted you.
No, I'm asking a permission.
Just a second.
Okay.
And in Protestantism, you also have the at least ostensibly a fidelity to the scripture, so that you can't just say anything goes and we're going to become LGBTQ now legitimately. Now, there are people who are doing this, and they are mostly in the Protestant purview because they don't have this authority that establishes various understandings of whether homosexuality is sinful or not, and so on. And so they can reinterpret these things. And that is a big problem. Nobody is interested in hiding any problems. But when you set up these straw man arguments and say, oh, Spencer said the Bible's fables and anything goes, you're just lying.
I never said that.
Okay.
Oh, you did.
I have a comment about statistics. Pew Research Center say Islam gains about as many converts as it loses in the U.S. So 0 at the end. So even the 20,000, you can just cancel them. Another thing, Elias Bayunis, he said that 75% of new Muslim converts, they leave Islam after that. So not many, 75% is a huge number. They go back because they find, usually they are fascinated with Middle Eastern, non-white religion. And yeah, it's fascinating. Our brother is wearing even the Moroccan jalaba. He likes it.
Like it, right?
Yeah, it's not Muslim, by the way, it's Berber. So you just think, because they're fascinated with these things and they think that's Islam, when they start digging in, oh, I didn't agree to killing apostates. I didn't know that Muhammad ordered that.
Well, Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate specifically cited that Muslims stand for their principles. That's why he converted, right? Andrew Tate.
I'm glad he converted to Islam, so take him. I want to say something about Muslims converting to Islam. Then you find out little by little things that you didn't agree at the beginning. Every product comes with a warranty, except Islam doesn't come with a warranty. If you don't like it, your head is going to go. So that's why it's not an appealing religion, and people would start rejecting it after they find in these little details inside.
I want to give them an opportunity to respond, and then we can go to the next issue.
Yeah, I'd like to respond because Robert brought up apostolic succession and claims that these doctrines have been held, since the beginning of Jesus. Jesus proclaimed his message to the apostles, and they passed it on to early church fathers, and then all the way down the line. And it's been this consistent message throughout. But on very core doctrines, which Daniel and I would actually like to spend more time on what he called the 95%, which is actually monotheism. Unfortunately, we believe that Christians, Trinitarian Christians, are representing a veiled form of polytheism. And you claim that this was the consistent message over time. Well, let's see what Justin Martyr, your own saint, says. And he's in the beginning of the 2nd century. He was born in the year 100. In his famous dialogue with Trypho, chapter 56, he says this. Let's see if his theology is the same as yours, Robert. I shall attempt to persuade you, since you have understood the scriptures of the truth of what I say, that there is, and that there is said to be another God and Lord, subject to the maker of all things, who is also called an angel, because he announces to men whatsoever the maker of all things, above whom there is no other God, wishes to announce them. So Justin Martyr says that Jesus is a second God, is another God, separate and distinct, and he is a lesser divinity. Now, John Baer, who I'm sure you would know is a famous Eastern Orthodox authority today, he comments on this passage. And he says this: as it is not God himself who thus appeared and spoke with man, the word of God who did all of these things, for Justin, quote, another God and Lord besides the maker of all, who is also called his angel, as he brings messages from the maker of all, above whom there is no other God. Then he says about this passage, the divinity of Jesus Christ, another God, is no longer that of the Father himself, but subordinate to it a lesser divinity. Now that's just one example. Justin Martyr, who you would consider a saint, you may even pray to, as the Eastern Orthodox pray to dead saints. But the reality is that your theology, according to you, on the Trinity is actually more correct than the person that you're praying to. And I can go through a whole more list on key doctrines, like the doctrine of the incarnation, the atonement, and the Trinity itself, that the early church authorities like Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Tertullian, and on up until the 4th century never preached the doctrine of the Trinity, sir. So when you make the claim that your message has been consistent without, what we see in the very beginnings on the fundamental point of who God is, you did not have the same doctrine. It took to get to the 4th century, and that's why Christianity, because at its very beginning was very comfortable with development. Oh, who is God? Is a man God? Is he God and man at the same time? So if you can have those sorts of developments, of course you can have developments about how laws are applied and whether or not we should be celebrating LGBTQ and all of that. That's your history, sir.
Not at all. Actually, no. The difference is that when it comes to LGBTQ, it's very clear that homosexuality is immoral, and that this is the consistent teaching of all the Christian groups up until quite recently. And so the ones that have changed that have departed from the faith. And you cannot have a development that contradicts what went before. The developments happen harmoniously. At the beginning of the church, there was a great deal of difficulty in understanding exactly how it was that God had become man. And so you have people trying to formulate it. And Justin Martyr tries to formulate it, and he does so erroneously. You have some assumption, probably coming from Islam, that the saints are infallible, and actually that's not the case. And so you want to quote me fathers of the church from before Nicaea all you want. The fact is that the Trinity was formulated at the Council of Nicaea in 325, and there isn't anything that was taught by the authorities in the church. Justin Martyr was a great saint, but he was not one who was formulating the doctrine and charged with the responsibility to give us what the teaching of the Christian faith is. The Ecumenical Council had that authority, and they formulated it in this way. Now, does this mean that Justin Martyr is a heretic? No, because he comes before that. This is no, because he was wrong. Yeah, absolutely.
So when he said he's another God, he was wrong.
There's only one God.
Right.
We are actually monotheists. I know that Islam teaches that everybody else is a polytheist.
I think you are.
Well, we're not. And so Justin Martyr was wrong about that. I'd be happy to speak about that. And this doesn't pose a problem for Christianity.
It does, because as you said, the doctrine of the Trinity doesn't come until the 4th century. So why?
No, there were people teaching it from the beginning. Justin Martyr wasn't.
Robert, I let you talk. You're interrupting me now. Listen, as I said, you just said that the doctrine of the Trinity came about and was established at the Council of Nicaea in the 4th century in the year 325. We can talk about it another time, because we would actually like to talk about theology. We want to talk about that 95%. So maybe we can do that another time. But the point is, and I challenge you, and I will be happy to debate this another time, that in the first 300 years of the church, you do not have a single church father, whether it be Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, if you want to go to Tertullian, although some people think think he's just a church writer. Down through the line up until the 4th century, they did not teach the doctrine of the Trinity, and I will defend that position anytime, any place.
Okay, because sure, there were plenty of church fathers
Give me one.
who taught the Trinity. Ignatius of Antioch. There were plenty of church fathers who taught the Trinity before Nicaea. It didn't spring out of nowhere. Basil the Great writes about it quite extensively, and so you acting like it was
Basil was when?
Some people made it up.
Was Basil?
Well, he comes after the definition, but I'm saying that he explains.
So what's
right.
The point?
So you
We're
think that he's one of the great saints, and he's revered as also one who is explaining and formulating the doctrine of the Trinity.
Yeah, exactly.
Then
I'd like to transition to the next story.
Yeah, we're getting in the weeds here.
We are.
But
That's
this is
what
a lot
I didn't
of
want to do. That's why I said we went through that part at the beginning. We have a few different things to go through. So Dylan Mulvaney, okay, transgender, Bud Light, he comes out, he's going viral. He cost Bud Light, Anheuser-Busch, I don't know, $29-30 billion. It's a lot of money it cost him, right? If Dylan Mulvaney today has a change of heart, okay, goes to sleep, cannot sleep all night, is praying, boom, he wants to find God. Would the religion of Christianity or Muslim welcome Dylan to convert to become a Muslim or a Christian? Would Muslim welcome Dylan Mulvaney?
Yeah, if he accepts that he cannot be other than his biological sex, that would be acceptable. Like when you become Muslim, it just requires saying the testification of faith. There is no God but God. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his final messenger. Then you become Muslim, and that wipes away everything that you've done previously. You start with a completely clean slate. So everyone is welcome to become Muslim, and we invite everyone.
So even a Dylan Mulvaney could be a Muslim.
Yeah.
On your end, Dylan Mulvaney lived a different kind of a life, wants to become a Christian, change his life. What position does the Christian faith take? Welcome.
Yeah, anybody can repent and become a Christian.
Actually, Christianity is for sinners, people who admit their sins and want to follow Jesus so he can live a better life and has his life changed. And that's what happened to me and happens to millions.
Well, in case he's watching, you have two choices now, Dylan. Which direction you want to go, okay?
But I
wanted
agree.
to clarify that for him.
I agree with Daniel.
Yeah.
He needs to admit he's a guy.
Great. And I'm sure if he's going to go through that, he'll do it. Next question for you. Enemy. Who is the enemy of Christians and who is the enemy of Muslims? Who is the enemy of Christian faith?
Well, the classic answer is by St. Paul, that we're not fighting against earthly powers, but against spiritual powers. And ultimately, there's a spiritual aspect to everything that an individual experiences in his life. Most of the time, they're not aware of it. But there are evil forces that try to lead people to do evil acts.
Yeah, the enemy is anyone who threatens freedom, our freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and anyone who is trying to kill the ones who are different than his religion or his thinking or his way of thinking. So any worldview that will threaten my freedom, my way of life, my way of changing, choose today to be a Christian, tomorrow a Jew, tomorrow an atheist, anything that will threaten that my choices and will force me just to follow one way, I will consider it an enemy.
Yeah, so that's an interesting answer. It seems like his religion is secularism and not the Christianity. But when it comes to Islam, the biggest enemies defined in the religion is number one, Satan, because he tempts people and takes them off of the straight path. Then what's called dunya, which is like the worldly life, which is a delusion, the life to come, the afterlife. That is the true reality. Dunya. Exactly. So we have to be focused on God and worshiping him and being on the straight path. And then also our desires like lust that will cause us to commit sins. And then also our ego, which is called nafs, the ego, which tells us that we're greater than God, that we are more important and that we are better than others just because we are who we are. These are the four spiritual enemies of humankind. And then in terms of a worldly perspective, I would say liberal secularism is the biggest enemy to all traditional people, Muslim, Christian, and it is the world power today.
Did you have anything to say or are you good?
No, I mean, I just be reiterating what Daniel said.
Sounds good. So here's a question I got for you. Obviously in America, everybody here lives somewhere in America, right? We all live in America.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why we're here. We'd like to stay here, God willing, make our life work, make things work, and make it a place where we can raise our kids, have a family.
Actually, I don't want to, but
you want to move out of here.
Yeah.
So you're looking at other places. Really?
Yeah.
Have you thought about some places?
Morocco.
Oh, so you want to go where he is from?
Yes.
Okay, any reason for it? What's your reasoning?
My wife is from Morocco, and I've been there many times. I've spent a lot of time there, and I enjoy it. And I want to. I haven't had any children yet, and I am actually afraid about the American society and the way it's going, especially over the past 10 years. And I don't want to raise my children here.
And by the way, to be fair, a lot of parents are also concerned about what's going on in America today. So good for you for actually wanting to go there. So here's one part that's confusing to me. About 3/4 of people, of Muslims, voted for Hillary Clinton when she ran for office. About 3/4. This is not too long ago they voted for. That's Muslims, right? Today, 74% of Muslims vote Democratic. Okay, when I look at values and principles, I'll give you top 10 issues for the 2024 ticket for Democrats and Republicans. And I kind of want to get your thoughts here, because this is an area where I feel like, Muslims and Christians can actually be unified in certain areas. And if we do, it's going to be a formidable opponent to go up against. I'm sure they're not going to like this. So 10 most important issues for Democrats in 2024. Number 1, climate change and environmental policy. Number 2, healthcare. 3, Black Lives Matter, police reform, things like that. 4, economic inequality. 5, voting rights. 6, education, then gun control, foreign policy, national security, labor rights, and jobs. Okay. The left is more pro-LGBTQ, that being taught in schools. It's things that they're open to the idea. What's wrong with that? Let them learn at an early age, et cetera, et cetera. On the right, Republicans, economic policy and taxation, number 1. Number 2, conservative judiciary. Okay. So Supreme Court, having conservatives being conservative, Supreme Court being conservative, immigration, border security, 4, Second Amendment rights, national security and defense, social and cultural issues like abortion, religious freedom, opposition to certain aspects of the cultural wars, etc., race, critical race theory, LGBTQ, some of the focal points. 7, election integrity. 8, state rights and federalism. 9, energy and environmental policy, and 10 being healthcare. So Dems, healthcare, number 2, Republicans 10. When I talk to a lot of Muslims, the values and the way they raise their kids and their families, I don't see any of it that would match much of what the left is presenting. Why do so many Muslims vote Democratic?
Well, it happened after Bush. It happened after Bush basically pushed through this Patriot Act, which criminalized so many Muslims just for their beliefs. So many imams were deported, so many imams in America, like American imams, just based on technicalities. So many imams were put under investigation, put on watch list, no-fly list, which was expanded under Obama, actually. And so that kind of attack on the Muslim community by the Republicans really traumatized a lot of the Muslim community. And I, for many years, have been telling Muslims that, look, we shouldn't just reflexively align with the progressive left, because their tolerance and their acceptance of Muslims is only skin deep. When you actually look at the policies and the foreign policy of the Democrats, like Hillary of all people, like Obama, they also have some very anti-Muslim policies, both domestically and internationally. And we have to look beyond the niceties, like Joe Biden will come on and say, inshallah, or Ramadan Mubarak, and maybe a Republican won't do that. So just because he gives you that nicety, you're going to bow to that political party. That makes no sense. We should not align with one particular party. We should maintain our independence, and others should cater to the Muslim community as a voting bloc, as opposed to us giving our allegiance to one side reflexively in the way that has been done in the past 10, 15 years.
Got it. What would you say, Jake?
No, I'll just reiterate the same thing so we can give them a chance.
Robert, what are your thoughts on this one here? Because to me, I look at the history and I have the conversations, and I'm always, surprised on what value from the left. I know there's a part of it's like, well, the right is more pro-Israel than the left is sometimes. the right is too much defensive of that, and the left is a little bit more open to the idea. But what would you say?
Well, Israel does have something to do with it. And it is also a lot, actually, what Daniel said, some of it was actually true, that the policies of the Bush administration and some of the things that still linger were so incredibly wrongheaded, and Muslims were quite resentful in some cases with immense justification. At the same time, also, and I think this is the heart of the matter, the left is sold out to the idea of racism and is obsessed with the idea of racism. Islamic groups in the United States, particularly after 9/11, but before that also, like the Council on American Islamic Relations, Muslim Public Affairs Council, and others, they very skillfully have portrayed any criticism of Islam, even opposition to jihad violence and Sharia oppression of women and others, as racism and bigotry. And, you know, Daniel actually has said in some of his debates that you criticize the left's agenda and you get put on hate lists and deplatformed. Well, that's actually happened to me because I spoke the truth about Islam, and the left does not want that out. They are completely sold out to the idea that that Muslims are all of one race, and that they're non-white, and that consequently any opposition to Islam is just racism and white supremacy, and that consequently they have to stifle all criticism of Islam and all opposition to jihad and defame and destroy those who speak that criticism. And so the Islamic groups love that because Sharia actually criminalizes criticism of Islam and it carries the death penalty.
But your work is racist, your work is racist.
That's a lot of hooey.
Your site calls for investigation of me, like his site. He is called to investigate me. Yeah.
Well,
yeah. Do you read your own site?
Call for the death penalty for apostasy and so on.
He has 4 articles on his site dedicated just to me that I need to be investigated because I don't agree with LGBT.
May I respond?
On his site. The thing about Robert Spencer, and I'm glad that he brought up this issue of racism, he is a racist. Like his site, anytime a Muslim anywhere or any Middle Easterner, doesn't have to be a jihadi or doesn't have to be a Muslim even, commits a crime, he puts it on his site and says, oh, jihadi, Islamic terror. And he creates this fear-mongering against immigrants. And imagine if you had a site dedicated to whenever a Jewish person committed a crime, you say, oh, Judaic violence, and you called your site Jew Watch. Or anytime a black person committed a crime, say, oh, Black Watch, this is black terror, this is black crime. That's what he does to Muslims, and he's had a long career of this. He was involved in the same counterterrorism work with the Republicans that he's now decrying and saying, oh yeah, I disagree with that. You were a part of that effort. You are part of those administrations.
Daniel, you're lying. You're lying again. I did advise the FBI when I was invited. I advised the FBI and military groups, CIA a couple times. Absolutely, yes. Yeah. And that was mid-level people who invited me who were trying to change the point of view of the higher ups, and that's why I got in.
Yeah,
that's not
like
constitute
me as terrorists.
And I wrote.
I have the CIA.
No, you're lying.
These 3-letter agencies Daniel, on me because of the kinds of work.
You're defaming me, and you're lying, and I need to have a chance to respond. Yeah, there are 4 articles there. How many articles are at Jihad Watch? About 80,000, going back 20 years.
Muslims
there are 4 that mention you, and 3 of them I didn't write. So I'm not entirely versed on everything they say.
Mainstream Muslim speakers like me, and you depict them as terrorists,
you are not
as
mainstream.
Hate mongers who need to be investigated.
You are a hate monger, and you approve. Did you not approve of the Taliban?
I approve of many Muslim governments.
Do you approve of the Taliban? Yes or no?
I do approve of the Islamic Emirates of Afghanistan.
Okay, great.
Yes, I do.
So I track jihad.
Do you approve of
excuse me?
Do you approve of the Russian Orthodox Church invading Ukraine?
No.
No, you don't? So you denounce the Russian Orthodox?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, your own church, great.
The hierarchy. That's not my church.
You're not Orthodox.
Robert. I am Orthodox. You have no understanding of Christianity.
You've denounced the Bible.
I am Greek Orthodox.
Jesus. Okay,
no, you're lying again. You set up these straw man.
But the point is that he's racist. He's been cited by terrorists. Anders Breivik, who killed about 100 people in Norway, cited Robert Spencer. He said, read everything from Robert Spencer about Islam.
Am I going to have
he gets endorsed from terrorists.
He keeps multiplying these things. And so you have to allow for some time.
Would you accept with a site called Jew Watch? Answer that.
It's not an analogy. If my sites were Muslim Watch, then yeah, you would have a point. But it's not. It's Jihad Watch. And jihad is people killing innocent people, terrorist activities, flying the planes into the buildings on 9/11. And so I track jihad activity.
Muslims didn't fly any planes.
Excuse me, you are interrupting again. And you were trying to make sure that I can't answer this defamation because you know that it's lies and you want to make sure the truth doesn't get out. But the fact is that the site tracks jihad activity, and it is a lie that if a Middle Eastern or a Muslim person commits a crime, I put that on the site. I only put it on the site if there is justification for the behavior in Islamic texts and teachings.
You think that Islam advocates for random killing of people? That's false.
There are plenty of Islamic authorities that I can give you
there are plenty
who justify that kind of thing.
Verses in the Bible that justify that kind of thing. So anytime a Jew commits a crime,
you are interrupting yet again.
You put it on a site and call it Jew Watch.
Excuse me. There are plenty of Muslims who will justify, Muslim clerics who justify the behavior, and I give the quotes.
People that have been condemned.
Excuse me.
We can give them.
And as far as Breivik goes, I knew this was going to come up at some point. It is a total lie. It was a total lie from the beginning. And I was ready for it. So I actually have what Breivik actually said. The Muslims showed us that deadly shock attacks are the only tool we have at the moment, which will guarantee that our voice is heard. That's on page 1351 of his insane
Read what he says about you.
Yeah.
Read what he says about you.
He quotes me, and he quotes a lot of other people.
He says, I recommend everything Robert Spencer has written on Islam. Did he say that or not? Did he say that or not?
Say that.
Okay.
Now, do you realize what you're saying here, what you're getting yourself into here?
No, I just want to make me. You have the same.
Excuse me. You keep talking over me because you do not want the truth to get out.
You asked me a question.
Now,
you asked me a question.
Breivik
you have the same ideology as Breivik. You have the same anti-immigrant ideology as Breivik.
Breivik actually criticized me because I would not call for violence.
Can you unpack for the audience what you guys are talking about?
Breivik is this crazy man in Norway who killed 77 people at a youth camp. They were not Muslims, incidentally. They were just kids. He was a nut. He was a lunatic, and he wrote this 1,300-page manifesto, which is very suspect. Because, for example, one of the reasons why I'm mentioned many times in it is because in it is the entirety of the script of a documentary I was in 2002. And I asked the producer of the documentary, how did this lunatic get the transcript of the documentary? And he said, I don't know. Not only was it never published, but it was never even made. We never made a transcript. And this guy who speaks broken English in half of his manifesto is suddenly perfectly transcribing over 100-page documentary in which I'm mentioned multiple times and speak multiple times. It's very suspect. And we don't know if it was who was behind it, who was with him. I'm suggesting his manifesto was,
You don't think he
obviously the killing was real, but I think he might have written part of it, but he certainly had help.
He didn't write
now, anyway, the thing is that he said that the Muslims inspired him to do violence. He says that very clearly. I just gave you the quote. If being quoted by a bad person makes one evil, then the Quran is quoted all the time.
My position.
The Quran
You're
is quoted.
strawmanning my position.
The Quran is quoted all the time by terrorists. So if I am guilty because Breivik quoted me, then the Quran is guilty because terrorists quoted all the time.
I'm going to give Daniel a chance to respond, and then we have 17 minutes left.
I haven't even finished responding to everything else he said.
Did you have a follow-up on what you wanted to say?
So the thing is, my point wasn't that he just cited Robert and that makes Robert bad. That wasn't my point. My point was that Robert shares the same ideology as that terrorist. The terrorist had the view that immigrants are a problem, specifically Muslim immigrants. They cause a problem for Western society. We need to stop immigration. This is a white supremacist, white replacement type of ideology, which Robert either shares or he basically facilitates with his site, which takes any time a Middle Eastern person commits a crime. And the best example, he claims that, we check whether the person has a Muslim background and has some kind of Muslim ideology. This is false. Just recently in June, there was a Syrian who stabbed children in France. And Robert immediately posted up another Muslim jihadi attack on his Twitter. His site put up an article. Then it turns out that this guy is a Syrian who's a Christian. His name is Abdul Masih, which means slave of the Messiah. He's a Christian. And all of the major news reports, BBC, France 24, reported that this was a Christian, actually. Robert doubled down and he said, no, this is a Muslim. And his site continues to have an article up that says this Christian is actually a Muslim who stabbed children in a playground. This shows that's a racist. This is a racist ideology that he's promoting because it's not based on ideology. He just sees a Middle Eastern name and says this is Islamic terror. And that's just one recent example. In many examples of this recently, like there was a stabbing in Brooklyn.
I would like to spend 2 more minutes on this.
Okay, because then I have to have a chance to respond.
You have a go forward and respond, and we're going to move on to
as far as the guy in June goes, he said he was stabbing babies, and he says, "Praise be to Jesus Christ." Now, this is obviously he's somebody who's trying to imitate, whether he's a Muslim who is pretending to be a Christian. ISIS has called for Muslims to pretend to be Christians in the West and carry out terror attacks. So that's a possibility. Also, there were people who knew him who stepped forward, and there were stories about it in the French press that said he was actually a Muslim. So I reported on these things. And I reported when he said he was a Christian, it's all there. It was a developing story, and there were several articles that we had about it. But the idea that there was some deception, much less racism, that's just Daniel trying to demonize somebody who actually agrees. I agree with Daniel about Islam.
That's what I'd like to do.
That's the funny thing about it.
That's why you call for my investigation.
I didn't.
I'd like to go to the next phase.
But I think you should be, yeah.
I agree. There you go.
I'd like to go to the next phase. What do Christians and Muslims have in common? What do they have in common?
Well, they would disagree, but monotheism is certainly one thing.
Definitely not.
And there is in Islam the appropriation of the biblical prophets, such that it's kind of invasion of the body snatchers Christianity. I mentioned the movie before. They take your personality and give you a different one. And so you have Abraham, you have Moses, you have Jesus in the Quran, but they're completely different figures from what they are in the Bible.
Robert, what do Christians, Muslims, and Jews have in common in America? What values and principles do Muslims, Christians, and Jews have in common in America?
Yeah, there's a general, probably in some aspects of sexual morality, with the exception of polygamy and sex slavery of infidel women and some other things like that, wife beating. But otherwise, you have the idea of the value of marriage. That's something certainly that they have in common.
What would you say? What do Christian, Jews, and Muslims have in common? Values and principles in America.
Yeah, we have shared values with actual traditional Christians. When it comes to Reform Christians, they're basically like Reza Aslan, Christian versions of Reza Aslan. Can you even call them Christians? With traditional Christians that actually care about the Bible and just don't call it a book of fables, we have values in marriage, preserving marriage, preserving chastity, modesty, opposing sexual immorality, preserving gender. The concept of gender is so important. That's a shared value with traditional Christians and traditional Muslims. The importance of the family, respecting parents, respecting, raising children the right way. Raising children to respect these values of morality, communities coming together. These are all shared values. They're traditional values.
Do you think
belief in God and caring about God?
Do you think society or again, rip this apart as much as you want, brother Rashid? You can, what I'm about to say here right now, you can come in and fully disagree with what I'm saying. Do you think there is you know how we always talk about who are the people of power, like the real people of power? I'm not talking about millionaires and billionaires or presidents. I'm talking people that are really the people of power, right? Mm-hmm. Do you think they would like to keep Christians, Muslims, and Jews, specifically Christians and Muslims, divided, pinned against each other with the fears of them potentially being united? Or no, that's a religious division, that there will never be a element of a unification amongst Christians and Muslims against a common enemy?
I mean, as somebody who studied Islam puts Christians and Jews as the first enemies from it started.
A little closer to the mic.
Muhammad's enemies, they were Jews and Christians. He never mentioned Buddhists or Hindus or any other religion. He mentioned basically Christians and Jews. So that the Muslims inherited that enmity from Muhammad until today. If you ask them who is the enemy, they will be the West. If you go to Morocco, for example, do statistics, it will be the West, especially America and Israel, because they represent Christians and Jews. So when the Quran says do not take Jews and Christians as friends, do you think what happened to Jews and Christians through history was just random or was based on doctrine? When the Quran says like you have to fight the Christians and Jews until they submit and they give the jizya, do you think that enmity started back then in the 7th century, or it just somebody caused it today? The enmity is inherited in the text in the Umar ibn al-Khattab. He kicked the Jews and Christians from the Arabic Peninsula. And Muhammad said, I will kick out Christians and Jews until only Muslims are kept in the Arabic Peninsula. When he was dying in his deathbed, he said, cursed be on Jews and Christians because they took the graves of their prophets as shrines. So all these things are embedded in Islam. Actually, my book, the ideology behind Islamic terrorism, the first chapter is in the beginning, it was hatred. So the beginning, the root of terrorism is hating who are not Muslims, especially Jews and Christians. There is a huge hatred. Actually, in the Sunnah, hating the non-Muslims is a must, is a part of faith. Al-wala wal-bara, they have a doctrine called al-wala wal-bara. You have to take only believers as your close friends and close allies, and you have to hate disbelievers. So this is inherited. If somebody want to follow Islam by the letter, he should take Christians and Jews as enemies.
Look, I'll answer your question. The powers that be, do they want to divide Christians and Muslims? Yes, absolutely. The powers that be started this war on terror, and they started this attack on all religion and tradition. They started with Muslims, and they created this counter-extremism policy. If you have certain beliefs as a Muslim, you believe that we should follow the Quran as it was revealed, follow the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, then you are an extremist, and we have the right to surveil you and detain you, etc. Now they've moved that from Muslims to Christians. Now Christians are coming under fire. All the tactics that were used against Muslims are now being used against Christians. Christians are being watched by the FBI. You go to protests like Drag Queen Story Hour at the public library or at the school board, you're on a watch list by the FBI. So these were tactics that are used by Muslims. Now they're being used against traditional Christians. And Robert Spencer was a part of that whole apparatus. So yes, the powers that be do want to divide Muslims and Christians because that way they can have an easier time. Most people are attracted to traditional religion. Most people hate feminism. Most people hate LGBT. Most people hate these new isms, these ideologies, and they want to stick to their traditions and values. How do the powers that be want to conquer those religions and values? Divide and conquer. So that definitely, I'm on the same page with you on that.
Yeah, I only asked the question because, you know, when I started our own insurance company, this is the thing I can use, is because we attracted people from all walks of life. It didn't matter who it was, Black, Hispanics, Asians, Christians, Scientologists, atheists, Catholics, Hispanics, Catholics. And we figured out the way to find things that we had in common. We have disagreements. I disagree. I just had a very nice, friendly debate with one of our top guys who's a Muslim, and we had a religious debate. We had a political debate, but then we found a bunch of things we agree with. Right? What they valued, what we value.
Right.
I don't think, eventually and I know I'm going to use this analogy because we talked about the mob earlier, and you were talking about what happens when you leave the mob, and you're talking about what happens when you leave the Muslim faith. Eventually in New York, the 5 mob families came together and they unified together, right? And I'm not using that analogy to say the similar things here, but I wonder what would happen if we realized that what they're trying to do to our kids, none of us agree with. None of us agree with. The whole saying goes that somebody can curse you out and you're like, yeah, whatever. Hey, Robert, you're such a F in this. Okay, cool. Hey, you're such a F in this. All right, cool. Hey, let me tell you, you're a loser. Cool. All right. Hey, I'm going to turn your kids into teaching them about LGBTQ at 5 years old. I'm sorry? What did you say? I'm going to do that. In Armenians, like, you go after the mother? No, we're not doing that. You go after Prophet Muhammad? Hey, what are you talking about? What are you doing? This is not okay with us. I think, that's happening today. And I don't know if it's there right now, but I would be very interested in finding ways to get more and more of these communities together to talk. We're going to have differences. We're going to have philosophical differences when it comes down to religion and theology and this and that, of course. And by the way, I'm not sitting here saying I agree with some of the values and principles that your church offers or your faith offers. I can't live like that. But I respect the fact that you respect it and you're devoted to it. It doesn't mean it's something I want to do, but at the same time, you're talking family, you're talking kids, you're talking certain things that we could agree on, traditional values that you're talking about. I can get behind that. Somebody may watch us and they're Muslim, they're looking at Robert, and Robert's obviously the biggest antagonist on this show today because naturally you've written the most things that's upset the most from the Muslim side. So you're going to be a target. And you've taken it like you've been a good sport about it. You've sat here and you've heard and you've given your position. Jake's come at you very prepared. I think Jake has done a phenomenal job with his arguments that he's had. Daniel's been very respectful. Brother Rashid, you have been, from your standpoint, extremely passionate about what you've done. And to be quite frank, your testimony is probably the most powerful one out of all of ours at this table.
Thank you.
Because you've gone through it. You went through it. You've seen the pain. And at the end, though, the audience, I hope, gets to see again that we can sit down, have a conversation, be respectful. Everybody made their points. There was no limitations on what one could say. And I think the real bigger enemy is not going to like us finding ways to unify. I just don't think they are. And the role I'm playing here is an element of my own curiosity and long-term finding ways to, fastest way to eliminate an enemy is to turn him into an ally. I'm trying to find ways if we can have some kind of a relationship and unify folks from different sides and see where this can go. So having said that, we are at the end of the podcast, at the end of the discussion that we had. Appreciate everybody's sportsmanship and being respectful to one another. For the most part, everybody was respectful. Rob, let's make sure we put the links below to everyone's book so everybody knows, as well as if you do have a YouTube channel, if you'd like to promote it so people know to come and find you as well. You do have one. If you don't mind sharing yours, everybody, if you can do that, and then we'll wrap it up.
My YouTube channel is The Muslim Metaphysician. So if you just typed it in on YouTube or any social media platform, Twitter and whatever else, you should be able to find it there. I mostly discuss theology with Christians and atheists. So that's what I focus on, and you can find it there.
Daniel?
Yeah, I have the Muslim Skeptic channel and also MuslimSkeptic.com, where we really debate a lot of these issues that are brought up. We didn't get a chance to get into detail on some of these issues like minor marriage, quote unquote, wife beating, etc. So I really analyze these topics and I explain them in a way that audiences can understand and really appreciate the Muslim perspective, the Islamic perspective. And I appreciate you, Patrick, for doing this and having this kind of conversation. I think it's really valuable, and I appreciate you for that.
I'd like to add that too, because I didn't get a chance to say that. I think that you've been very fair, and we appreciate that.
Also, one more plug that I can make, for Muhammad Hijab, because Muhammad Hijab, you talked to him and Eddie, and they facilitated this. So I really hope that you have Muhammad Hijab on here, because he's really a amazing Muslim public intellectual, and he'd be, you have a great conversation, inshallah.
I would love to have a very influential gentleman like Muhammad Hijab, one from the Jewish community and one from the Christian community, for all of us to have a conversation together. I realize 2 hours is not enough, 2.5 hours is not enough. I think that may be 3-4 hours, but we'll figure something out. I know you have a channel. I know you're all over the place as well.
Yeah, I actually, I'm a little bit lagging in terms of the videos. I have a YouTube channel, Jihad Watch Video, and every Wednesday evening, whenever we can do it, David Wood and I do a show, This Week in Jihad, covering the latest news. But unfortunately, I don't have a whole lot.